Members of Darlington Borough Council, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is now being live streamed. Please receive the Worshipful, the Mayor of Darlington, Councillor Chris McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Swinhoe. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this special meeting of the Council. I'm confident I don't need to speak to you at length regarding the virtual meeting protocols. They're embedded in our DNA now. However, just a quick reminder that microphones should remain on mute at all times during the meeting, unless you're invited to speak, at which point you should unmute your microphones and address the meeting, subsequently remembering to place your microphones back on mute once you've finished speaking. If you do wish to speak, you should indicate this by using the raise hand function on the menu control bar. I'm being supported by Democratic Services staff who will help me keep track of who wants to speak. It may take me a bit of time it may take them some time to relay any messages, so I do ask for your patience and understanding if I don't respond to you immediately. Once you've spoken, please can I ask that you lower your virtual hand once again. I'm sure we're all versed in this, but it's always useful to remind ourselves. Item number 1 is attendance at the meeting. We undertook a roll call as members joined the meeting just before we began, and I can confirm that we have 46 members in attendance using Teams. Ahead of the meeting, apologies were received from Councillor Hilary Allen oh, sorry, I do apologise, colleague. First mistake of the evening. Councillor Hilary Lucas. Members who have not joined the meeting or given apologies will be recorded as absent. Item number 2 is declaration of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest? Councillor Crumbie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, it was to give apologies for Councillor Newell.
Noted. Thank you, Councillor Crumbie.
Thank you.
Any further apologies? Okay. Declaration of interest. I'd return to that. Do any members wish to declare any interest? No. Moving on, item number 3 is announcements, and there is just one announcement to make this evening. It is with great sadness that I must inform members of the recent death of former councillor Peter Jones. Peter was elected to represent the Piedmont Ward in 1983 and served on the council until 1995. In 1989, he was also elected to represent the town on Durham County Council, where he pushed for Darlington to gain unitary status. May I ask members to please join with me and observe a short silence in respect of our former colleague. Thank you, colleagues. Item number 4 is questions with notice from the public. There are no questions for consideration this evening. Item number 5 is medium-term financial plan. The report has been circulated to all members. I now call upon Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott, the leader of the council, to move the recommendations and speak to the report. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the recommendations as detailed in paragraph 7 of the submitted report, and I would like to make some following comments. We're proposing this evening a 1.9% council tax increase to cover services important to residents and the 3% precept to cover social care, totalling 4.9%. Social care continues to be a major pressure and successive governments have failed to deal with the funding of it. This must be addressed nationally and dealt with quickly. It's important coming out of COVID that we have sufficient resources to deal with extra problems that may occur, and that's why we have opted to apply the full 3% precept this year, rather than deferring part to a future budget. The increase for Band A property is £1 per week, and for people who are struggling, they can benefit from the Council Tax Support Scheme. During the consultation exercise, the increase did not receive objections. We received well-funded rebate to cover the COVID costs, and with efficiency savings and income from developments, it's allowed us to put continued support into the Futures Fund to improve the services, including community safety, street scene, etc., which are very important to our residents. We're also proposing to commit £100,000 to support climate change priorities and £50,000 to the Stronger Communities Fund to allow councillors to identify and help issues in their wards. And other Cabinet members will obviously speak to at least one of these issues. We still face uncertain times ahead as a result of COVID. And whilst we've been able to help business sector from government grants, it's important that we do everything we can to support our residents, and this medium-term financial plan does just that. I'm only speaking briefly because the rest of my Cabinet colleagues are actually going to speak to the report as well. So I move the report.
Thank you, Leader. Is that seconded?
Seconded.
Okay. That's been seconded. Are there any questions to the Chief Officer's Executive of a technical or factual nature on the report? There are no questions of a technical or factual nature. I now invite members to enter into discussion on the report. Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I give notice of an amendment to the motion, please?
Could you hold on one moment? Has this been shared with Democratic Services, Councillor Harker?
No, but if you wish to accept the amendment now, I would ask Democratic Services to email it out to members.
Can you, I'll just hold on, colleagues.
No.
Okay, colleagues, an amendment is going to be emailed by Shirley now. Councillor Harker, can I ask you to read the amendment? Okay, but hold on one second, I just want to check it's been emailed to colleagues. Okay, colleagues, there should be an email in your inbox. Councillor Harker, could I ask you to read your amendment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the amendment refers to paragraph 7 on page 4 of our agenda pack, which is the recommendation for the MTFP. There are two parts to the amendment. The first is to change A(1) to read council tax increase of 1.99% for 2021-22, and that removes the reference to the adult social care precept. And secondly, to add a little c, which will read, defer the adult social care precept of 3% until the year 2022-23. And in the email that's gone out, Mr. Mayor, if I can just say that it includes the suggested amendments together with the highlights changes on the original wording in the report.
Are you intending to speak to your amendment, Councillor?
Yes, if I'm.
If you hold one moment. Okay, thank you, Councillor Harker. Can I ask our Chief Finance Officer, who's had sight of the amendment, to give her professional view, please? Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the amendment, just for members' information, would mean there would be a reduction in balances of £1.573 million across the life of the MTFP. So taking the adult social care precept and moving it to next year would have a detrimental impact on balances of £1,573,000.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can I call on, bring you back in, Councillor Harker? Do you wish to speak to the amendment now, please?
I do, if I should do so now, Mr. Mayor. In moving the amendment, I want to make 3 broad points. Firstly, the obvious question to answer, is this affordable? And the answer to that question is clearly yes. It does not require any change to service provision over the duration of the MTFP, but as Elizabeth Davison has indicated, would require the one-off use of reserves. Whilst the report notes the current financial pressure on the budget, it also notes that there is a balance planned through to 2024-25. And indeed, Appendix 7 of this report shows that we have sufficient usable balances at the end of the MTFP to fund the deferral of the precept until next year. The second point is I'd just like to make a few comments about the adult social care precept. Members will be aware that this was introduced some 6 years ago. For around 5 years now, councils have had to add, on average, an extra 2% on top of the annual increase in council tax. In cash terms, this extra tax over the last 5 years has almost doubled the increase in council tax that Darlington residents have had to pay, all because the government isn't funding social care adequately so. Robert Jenrick, who's the Secretary of State for HCLG, in a statement to the House of Commons on the 4th of February 2021, stated that the distribution of resources generated through the adult social care precept does not match the pattern of assessed need, i.e. in simple terms, it isn't providing the funding where it's needed. And that begs the question, why does the government persist with a method of funding that even the Secretary of State admits himself is not fit for purpose? And secondly, why of all years, with an economy savaged by COVID, does the government choose this year to continue with that precept? My third point returns to the question of, are we in a position to financially support this? Before considering that, let me remind colleagues some of the things that we've observed over the last year. Nearly 1 million additional children have been eligible for free school meals. We've seen a rise of some 600,000 children who are living in poverty. There's been a rapid increase in the uptake of food bank usage. We've seen record levels of redundancies being reported. We've seen a rise in universal credit claimants. Each of those indicators are indicators of families suffering, in many instances, severe financial hardship. In January, at a full council meeting, we were sufficiently concerned over the financial hardship faced by universal credit claimants that we wrote to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister urging the government to extend the £20 universal credit uplift. I would argue, therefore, that a mere 3 weeks later, it would be perverse of us if we were not concerned about the impact that the adult social care precept will have on many families in our communities. Returning to the question of, can the council afford to do this? Whilst we can, that's actually the wrong question to ask. The question we should be asking ourselves is, can our communities afford this rise? And the answer to that question, I would argue, is no. The government knows councils are underfunded. They know adult social care is under pressure, and yet they choose not to address the problem, forcing councils to further increase council tax. For many families facing financial hardship, this increase is both unaffordable and grossly unfair, and therefore I urge councillors to support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harker. Is that seconded? Can whoever indicated seconding, can they indicate the name?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor McCollum seconding.
Do you wish to speak or reserve the right?
I will reserve the right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Okay, thank you. An amendment has been moved and seconded. I'd ask members to enter into debate on the amendment. Councillor Dalston.
Is it to comment on the amendment? Sorry, I don't have.
Yeah. Sorry, your hand was still raised.
Yeah, sorry. No, just to make, I will speak. Just to make the point that, you know, the essence of what Labour are saying tonight is that tomorrow will look after itself, and we'll just think about today, which is the standard approach that we've seen over many years of Labour control here in Darlington. I would like to reiterate the point that we are living through very uncertain times, and we have a large gap in the future of our MTFP for years to come. So it's important to note to members that any decision we make tonight or any deferment does affect us ultimately in the future, and will affect some of the services that I know that residents depend on, and that's the increased capacity of our street scene, the increased capacity of our community safety. So let's make no bones about it. The deferment would affect people down the road, and we have to be honest with residents that we are planning for the future, and that's what this MTFP sets out to do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott, Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would urge Council to vote against this amendment. Councillor Harker is talking about using balances this year and deferring the precept until next year. We really don't know what the future is going to hold as far as we're concerned. You know what the financial strategy is. It's not different to when you were in power. You applied the precept and didn't use the balances. I understand that in the scrutiny committee, in the resources scrutiny committee, Councillor Harker, you did say that you supported the 3% precept because you felt that it was necessary to fund social services. You've obviously had a change of mind since you were in that scrutiny committee. But I think that if we use the reserves now, the more we use reserves, the more it's going to affect our going forward. And it may mean that we would have to have cuts within the 4-year period of the MTFP. So I would put the question to you, which services are you going to cut? Our policy is to keep the services and improve the services where we possibly can and support people while we can. And I would urge people not to go along with this amendment, because I think the use of balances is absolutely crazy at this point in time. I think you made the point about people struggling. Councillor Harker, you know very well that the council tax support scheme is there to help people who may be struggling with their finances. The council tax increase on a Band A property is £1 per week, which is not a significant amount of funding. And I would say that we need the funding now to support social care for those people who need the help now. And I think to actually propose using the balances is absolute madness at this point in time. So I would urge Council to reject this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott. Councillor Johnson, you raised your hand. Was that in relation to the substantive debate or the amendments?
Well, I can speak against the amendment.
If you wish.
Yes, thank you, Chair, Mr. Mayor. Despite Councillor Harker's views that they know better than the people who are actually putting the MTFP together, it's pleasing that we're able to present a balanced 4-year MTFP despite the internal pressures and the direct impact COVID-19 has had on council financing this year and more than likely years to come. To that end, we must press ahead with our key priorities of growing the Darlington economy, being innovative and creative in the way we work. The government has stepped in and supported this year's MTFP and are providing further support in 21-22, which is helpful. However, there remain significant pressures which are challenging, particularly around the long-tail impact of COVID-19 on our economy and service demand, and the increasing pressure on social care in both adults and children's services. However, as I have said, we have a balanced MTFP and we will continue to innovate and look for creative opportunities for efficiency. Our recent external audit report from Ernst & Young confirmed we use our resources well, we provide value for money, and so we will continue in this vein to be efficient and as effective as possible. So may I just highlight some of the positives going forward into next financial year. Our joint venture companies are pressing ahead with good sales figures despite COVID-19. In the new financial year, our first site outside of Darlington will be established, with a build anticipated to start over the summer period. Despite challenges, our council tax collection rates have remained high, and we will continue to work sympathetically with residents who find themselves in difficulty. Our revenue and finance teams have done a sterling, excuse the pun, job in administering the grants to our businesses and individuals, and Darlington has been a top performer in the speed in which funding has been allocated. We will continue to prioritise getting this funding distributed. The capital programme has a wide range of exciting projects being developed and delivered, and the implementation of an integrated control point system will be introduced, with training to be rolled out to team members from March. This will be more efficient and it removes the reliance on a paper-based system. We will continue to invest in our ICT infrastructure to ensure our teams can be agile and effective as possible, and take the opportunity COVID-19 has presented with us to review the way we work. I fully support the proposed medium-term financial plan, and I really do not accept Councillor Harker's attempts to tell us what we should be doing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Layton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's well worth noting that our neighbouring authorities, and including those in the combined authority, do not share this council's insistence on levying the full 3% social care precept in this year. Indeed, you can look to North Yorkshire County Council, and the leader, Carl Lees, says, whilst acknowledging the need to maintain services to the most vulnerable residents, he states, we think it is right that we use reserves at this point, and goes on to say that any increase in council tax has a disproportionate adverse implications for the low-income families. North Yorkshire are to increase their precept by only 1.5% this year and 1.5% next year. Indeed, as a last illustration, County Durham, the leader, Simon Hennig, says in a similar vein that they're not going to increase the council tax by 5% because, and I quote, we all understand how challenging these times are for households across the country. Durham County Council proposed social care precept to be increased at only 1% this year and 2% next year. My point is that it's not a party political thing. It is just about, is Councillor Dalston talking all the way through my thing? I think that's rather rude. It is not a party political point, and it's not to attack or to criticise the. It's very distracting to have somebody.
Councillor Layton, that may be, but he is on mute, so there's not a lot we can do, really.
It's just the visual. It's not a party political thing. It's not about criticising the council. What it is just asking for some flexibility, asking for the consideration that other councils, both Labour, mixed and Conservative, have done across this area. All our neighbours are doing it. Why are we standing alone and being so inflexible? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Linton. Can I bring in Councillor Boddy now?
Hello, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask three very short questions, really. Doesn't borrowing money cost money? Why has Councillor Harker changed his position from the position he had in economy and resources? And haven't our reserves fallen substantially over the last few months during the duration of the crisis? That's really a question for Elizabeth, really. Could we have some? I believe they've come down quite substantially, although they're still within government guidelines. That they have come down quite substantially, and if we could just have some clarification on that, please.
Just to respond to the second point, that I'm informed by officers that the detail that you seek is set out in the report, Councillor Boddy. Can I bring in Councillor Cindy Hughes, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight we're debating the introduction of a pretty substantial council tax rise, a regressive tax that would affect not just the poorest among us, who may or may not qualify for current council tax reduction schemes, but also those families just above the threshold for public assistance or support. The poorest and those struggling hard-working families are being squeezed from all sides. We and government know that COVID is having a disproportionate impact on these already hard-pressed groups. And sadly, the future is not looking particularly bright for local authorities like ours in the Northeast, where child poverty after housing costs have seen the steepest rise in the country in recent times. Unemployment is predicted to reach its peak later this year, possibly throwing even more Darlington families into serious financial difficulty. The Institute of Financial Studies has shown that COVID has had a devastating effect on the finances of families on low or uncertain incomes, many of whom have little or no savings and are struggling to keep up with essential bills. This amendment will help to alleviate some of the unbearable pressure and uncertainty currently hanging over many in Darlington. Britain is experiencing the worst recession of any major economy. Families in Darlington are suffering. This is simply the wrong time for a 4.99% council tax rise. It's time central government properly funds local councils. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cindy Hughes. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this evening we have to decide where does our primary responsibility lie? Does it lie with the bank balance of the council or with the communities we represent? We've heard already from Councillor Harker that the council can well afford to defer the social care precept for 12 months. Councillor Scott says it's crazy to use reserves, but this administration is proposing to do that itself over the next 4 years. It's simply a matter of degree. And there are, as Councillor Hughes has just told us, there are thousands of people in Darlington financially struggling who don't have that luxury. Their bills have to be paid now. Members of councils, fire and police authorities are wrestling with this dilemma right now, Mr. Mayor. In fact, Councillor Dalston and I did just that earlier this month on Durham's Police and Crime Panel. The recommendation was to increase the police precept by nearly 7%, representing £15 extra a year, this next year for a Band D house. It's fair to say, Mr. Mayor, that in our comments at the meeting, Councillor Dalston and I both wrestled with the decision. We have an excellent police force that we want to support, but our principal duty had to be to the people we serve. So, although the recommendation eventually went through, Councillor Dalston and I both voted against. Mr. Mayor, amidst the economic devastation of COVID, that was the right thing to do. And I simply ask Councillor Dalston for consistency this evening by voting down this precept as well. The adult social care precept increase before us this evening is £46.97, more than 3 times the size of the police precept increase that Councillor Dalston voted against a couple of weeks ago. The total increase being proposed by this Conservative administration is more than 5 times the rate of the Consumer Prices Index. Mr. Mayor, as Councillor Hughes has told us, poverty, including child poverty, is soaring. These are exceptional circumstances, the worst recession in over 300 years. Food bank usage is rocketing. The charity Citizens Advice has said that 1 in 7 people are now unable to pay their household bills in the wake of the pandemic, with council tax amongst those issues causing problems. Councillor Dalston and fellow members of the Conservative group, please take a step back and vote for this amendment. Financially hard-pressed people across the borough will thank you for it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. I'm just checking if there's any further speakers. Okay, I've got Councillor Andy Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be brief because many of the points have been covered. Speaking in support of the amendment, I mean, Councillor Scott says she doesn't know what the future holds. Well, I would say that our residents don't know what the future holds. And in particular, once furlough ends, I think there's going to be a lot of people in a great deal of difficulty. This pandemic has had a negative impact on so many people in so many ways. We've got the reserves. We can balance the budget. Councillor Johnson himself talks about what a strong position this council's in, with many schemes coming forward. We're in a very strong position to give our residents a break here. I think it is just perverse to ask our residents to pay more at this time when we've got that money in reserves and so many projects on the go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Before we continue, just to clarify, colleagues, I've got Councillor Cousins, then Councillor Ali, then Councillor Snedker, then Councillor Curry, and then Councillor Kevin Nicholson. So could I bring in Councillor Cousins, please, Jan Cousins?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, my comment is on the social care precept. Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to comment on the unfairness of this precept. In Darlington, over the last 5 years, the adult social care precept alone has increased council tax by 10.4%. If we go ahead with it this year, that will increase it to 13.7%, which is almost 14%. In pounds and pence for a Band D property, that is £136.17 over the last 5 years. And if we go ahead with it this year, it will be a massive £183.14. It's shocking for struggling families. You know, this is an additional burden placed on local taxpayers because, as the government openly acknowledges, the government isn't actually funding local authorities well enough. I wonder how long will the government persist in using this, you know, grossly unfair precept. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cousin. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to raise, when we're talking about such an important issue, we are in a pandemic time. Everything's been so uncertain and it continues to do so. And dealing with the residents across the borough of Darlington with especially adult social care issues, I find it hugely important that I just feel really let down by the government misleading us. Earlier, the government has said about the adult social care funding. This year, they've talked about the additional £1 billion being available, £1 billion, which was really, really good to hear, to fund adult social care. What they've been rather coy about is that only 30% of that £1 billion comes from government. The remaining 70% is only available if our councils raise council tax by an extra 3%. And this isn't the first year this has been done. Councils are left therefore with the forced, impossible choices: unfairly raise council tax to adequately fund adult social care, or face having to cut services which support vulnerable adults. And we know that we've already suffered this, and when we suffer the cuts, our residents lose out, the residents that we speak for. And it's because of these residents we represent that have elected us to represent their voice. This is why we are speaking to move this amendment forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Can I bring in Councillor Snedker, please?
With respect, Mr. Mayor, I think Councillor Curry was before me.
Not according to my
Okay,
I will. If you're willing to let Councillor Curry come in before you, Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you, Councillor Snedker. I attended this scrutiny, and I watched many of the scrutinies where everybody on the scrutinies agreed to accept these recommendations. Since that meeting, I have attended the LGA opposition group leaders meetings, and I found out that many councils are not putting it up by 3%, but is putting it up over 2 years, doing 1.5 each. If this amendment had suggested that, I would be supporting that amendment. But as you've suggested, deferring it, the compound impact on our reserves will be tremendous, and I cannot accept that.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor, and my apologies for that mix-up. Councillor Snedker.
That's perfectly okay. It is a difficult situation that we find ourselves in. I feel that councils up and down the country, local authorities, are being blackmailed by central government. They're being forced to increase their council taxes to pay for adult social care, which should be funded effectively, consistently and sufficiently by central government. And to be forced to put this precept on top of people who are struggling, people, as we've heard other councillors mention, going through one of the worst recessions in centuries for this country. And to talk about only a small increase in someone's outgoings is completely to miss the point about people having lost almost everything and also lost hope, because with furlough coming to the end soon, with universal credit still uncertain as to how much that will be uplifted to cover people's expenses, and the precariousness of employment and also precariousness of where they can live with the eviction ban due to come out soon. I think this is the last time to be increasing council tax by this large amount. It isn't an easy decision to make, having just literally heard the amendment and having to think this through. I think we have the reserves. It will undoubtedly reduce the reserves. It will not require a reduction in services because we have the money in the budget for now. And it will also send a very strong signal to Generic and the rest of the national government that adult social care should be funded properly from central government. So in the balance, I will be supporting this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Snedker. Councillor Kevin Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting the Labour amendment this evening. I'm absolutely blown away and staggered by the hypocrisy shown by the Labour Party this evening. I've served on the council for a small number of years compared to a lot of other people. But in all of those 4 years I served on the council under the Labour administration, the Labour Party raised council tax every year. And, you know, Councillor Wallace sits there and says that the council is in a fantastic position when some 24 months ago, if not shorter, he was proposing that we move and relocate Crown Street Library because the situation we were in, we were destitute. So either the Conservative Party in the last 24 months has done a spectacular job of our finances, or you weren't being very honest with the finances yourself, Councillor Wallace. Now, the adult social care precept is there and it exists to support the most vulnerable people within our communities. And as a councillor, that is our first and foremost job, and that's what this money will be going on. Secondly, on to Councillor Layton's point around the other local authorities in the area who are not raising council tax. You'll find that conveniently those local authorities all holding elections at the moment, and generally, like a tactic the Labour Party used to use, they wouldn't increase council tax to the highest rates in those years. So I won't be supporting the amendment, and I'm blown away by the hypocrisy shown by the Labour Party this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Can I bring in Councillor Allen, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not the greatest when it comes to high finance, but one of the things that appears to me on reading this report is that there seems to be a small pool of people who are going to be asked to fund the entire provision for the elderly, and that could in turn prove very difficult for them. My other sort of thing that struck me was how many people are actually paying full council tax, as it is they who are the ones who are being asked to uphold the entire income, and yet they may not be able to due to COVID and their own personal circumstances either. And I still don't understand why, when the government itself has said that these increases could be spread over 3 years, why we are trying to impose it all in one go. That's just from my personal viewpoint, because I really don't understand this this kind of thing at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Holroyd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Briefly, we all know that national taxation is more fairly distributed than council tax, being better linked to income and assets in general. It's concerning that the non-progressive part of taxation, that is council tax, is ever increasing. It's taking an ever increasing proportion of residents' incomes and tax takes. We must ensure that adult social care is better linked to people's assets and ability to pay. I therefore will be supporting this motion because I believe it should be funded by nationally rather than local council tax.
Thank you, Councillor Holroyd. Councillor Cully, please. Pauline Cully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It will come as no surprise to you that I will be against this amendment. Once again, they've come up last minute with this amendment. They've had weeks of debate over this. We've had this to every scrutiny committee and nothing was said at any of them. And suddenly last minute you're coming up with something, oh, we don't want to have the increase for adult social care. Councillor Scott, Heather Scott, said right at the very beginning that parties of every colour, when they've been in government, have had this funded in this way, and you're just not accepting it, are you? That you are as much to blame for this. Why didn't you say something at the scrutiny? I still don't understand. What you had the opportunity at every single one of them to say something, so that we didn't have this tonight. But again, you all chose not to. Shame on you. Thank you.
Can I bring in Councillor Cruddas, please? Councillor Cruddas. Councillor Cruddas.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I go along with what Councillor Cully's just said there. We have this, political grandstanding at the council meeting again to try and get us as a Darlington Council to change national policy. We may all agree that social care would be better funded nationally, but the way we have of doing it here is to put a precept on to support our most vulnerable people, and won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cruddas. Councillor Keir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to reiterate exactly what Councillor Cully said. I will not be supporting this amendment. There have been many debates in many of the scrutiny committees, bringing it to council and then doing the usual showboating of Labour national policy. And this could all have been discussed and agreed through the scrutiny committees, and to bring it tonight in an orchestrated way, I think it's poor. It does nothing for the people of Darlington, and if they were sincere in what they're bringing tonight, they would have brought this up through the scrutiny committees and tried to put their views forward there. And I think this is just an absolutely sad situation where we are debating national politics in here, and Labour are making mischief because you could have had these debates in the place where they are debated, which is the scrutiny committees.
Thank you, Councillor Keir. OK, I think I'm going to bring Councillor McCollum in, who seconded. Right, I do apologise. Hold on, hold 1 second, colleagues. OK, right, I apologise, colleagues. Councillor Lister, did you wish to say something?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's why I put my hand up.
Yeah.
I'm just a bit taken aback by this sort of moral indignation from the Conservative group about bringing things to council. I thought council was the decision-making body. In scrutiny, you don't make decisions there. You can make decisions, obviously, but it all goes forward to council. And I don't understand why. Just because I don't go to any of those scrutiny meetings, but I don't understand why. As I say, that there's such indignation that it wasn't mentioned. Policies formed all the way through the council, and this is the final decision-making place, and that's where it should be made.
Thank you, Councillor Lister. I'm going to bring in Councillor Rachel Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, as Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, I'm going to set my stall out. I don't disagree that there needs to be an adult conversation cross-party with regard to the national funding for adult social care. However, you know, this policy and the MTFP, it has been to scrutiny. You've had your opportunity there, as all of my colleagues have said, and this is showboating. Adult social care is the largest cost to our council budget. However, we also believe this is an area where we can make one of the most significant impacts on our residents' lives. The work undertaken in this department supports some of the most vulnerable people within our communities, and this MTFP secures the funds to ensure that we continue to support and enhance these people's lives, and this is especially critical now. With the additional challenges faced by our most vulnerable in the face of COVID-19, we all know that we are facing these challenges now. This year is probably one of the most important years ever, that we need to get this right, and we need to be supporting our residents. And unfortunately, that means, because of the decisions taken nationally, that this is what we need to do. But this is not the time to be attempting to score political points. I'm not interested in red on blue politics. I'm interested in the responsibility that we have to look after our residents in Darlington, and whatever way we can do that, we will. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. If nobody else has indicated that they wish to speak, Councillor McCollum did second and reserved the right to speak. Is there anybody else before I bring Councillor McCollum in? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having been a member of the council for so many years, it's quite interesting to hear that it's the Labour Party criticising the Conservatives for putting up a council tax when we've been doing it for about 17 years, each and every year from 2000. The Labour Party have put this council tax up religiously each and every year that has gone by. So it's a bit of ironic that the boot's on the other foot. But just a couple of comments regarding the introduction of this new idea. There's been some, well, Councillor Lister mentioned that, you know, this is what this council is for, which of course she is quite right. But I do think there ought to be, in fairness and courtesy, that this thing should have been delivered to all councillors much early, to give us plenty of time, give us more time, let's put it that way, to think about it through for the ramifications of what they're proposing. To drop it in 2 minutes after the committee has started, followed straight by this discussion, I would suggest is totally unfair. Councillor Layton has made a lovely speech comparing Darlington Borough Council with Durham and North Yorkshire. But surely it's a bit like you and I, Mayor, comparing our personal finances, that, you know, you're going to pay 10 quid on food, and should I spend the 10 quid,
with you not knowing just how my finances are. We've got a similar situation here, 3 local authorities, each with their own budgets, each with their outgoings. And surely you can't compare one authority with another based on such simple information. So I think that's totally irrelevant. The point is, which has been made very, very clearly, is that we are in unprecedented times. Finance, unemployment, vulnerability, and all of the great problems which have occurred over the last 10 months, and it's already been said by a lot of the speakers, it's going to continue. And there is a risk, and the risk by definition is something that we do not know. We do not know it's coming along tomorrow or next month or next 6 months. What we do know, however, there is a need. There is a need from the vulnerable people in Darlington. And the Conservative Party have gone against principles that we've held for decades, which is to minimise the amount of council tax, minimise all the tax that people pay. But in this one instance, in this particular instance, we realise that there's something more important than finance, which is to look after and care for those people in need. And that really is why this 3% has been added on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. There are no other colleagues or members indicating they wish to speak. Councillor McCollum, you reserved your right to speak. As a seconder, do you wish to speak?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Councillor McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, I am almost 100% certain that none of us would be considering raising council tax at all unless we had any other choice. As it is, we are living in uncertain times, and an accusation from the leader and several others was that Labour is living in today. I dare say that is better than living in the past. Members seem to be quite entranced with that. We have our eyes on the horizon, and this council, the MTFP, is prohibited from being truly ambitious by the lack of a fair funding review promised for several years now by the Tory central government. If council wants further evidence of the damage that Tory government has done to our reserves and our resources, they need only look at paragraphs 2 to 6 of the submitted report, which has been circulated well in advance. Councillor Johnson is right to point to this council's historically well-managed budget. It is something that previous Labour administrations were very proud of in conjunction with our excellent officers. And I don't disagree with Councillor Mills that we have to do what is right by our residents. But as Councillor Scott was at pains to make clear, there are resources and council tax support schemes available to those people who are most vulnerable financially. Our concerns, as raised by Councillor Hughes, quite rightly, are those families that are squeezed in the middle, the just about managing, the jams. They're the people most affected by the pandemic economy and are equally the most put upon by the proposed increase. This administration talks about the availability of funds and resources to combat hardship. Do they not consider that they could defer this for 1 year to give people a chance? Councillor Snedker was absolutely right that social care has to be reformed from the top down. Jeremy Hunt in Parliament this week spoke to the same thing, saying that a massive increase of 7 billion was needed by the end of 2024-25 to patch up the holes in our social care. But also there has to be welfare there has to be wholesale reform at the highest level. This is not possible here, but we are talking about it. It is national policy, but it affects us on the ground floor. It affects us here. Coronavirus has rocked families across this borough, and the uncertainty beyond May, with the status of furlough yet to be determined, is unbelievable. Nearly 2 million people have not worked for 6 months due to the economic impact of the pandemic. That's a figure from the Resolution Foundation sent out today. The financial impact of coronavirus has fallen disproportionately on people of working age, and nearly 38% of adults in the UK have seen their financial situation worsen because of COVID. To add insult to injury, we are asking residents to pay for central government's mistake in how it handles social care funding. The fact that the precept exists is purely in a fact of that the government is not funding social care properly. We are asking not to remove it. We are asking to defer it for a year. It has been made clear that we can do this with reserves. It is not what we would want. It is not what we would wish, but it is for a year to give people a chance. Beyond that, we hope that there will be a fair funding review so that local government might be funded adequately. as is made clear by the needs and the efforts we have made over this past year. We have shown through our efforts and through our good works, our services, that local government is invaluable. We cannot put a price on it. And central government has to realise that too. For now, I would beg council to back this amendment and defer the council tax, the social care precept for another year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McCollum. Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott, as the mover of the original motion, you now have a right of reply. Is there anything you wanted to say or add to debate on this amendment before we move to a vote on the amendment?
I did say when I urged people to vote against the amendment, and my other colleagues have added to it as well. But I think just one comment to make. Yes, you're asking to defer this for another year, but once you've used the balances have gone. So are you proposing that you're going to use next year's precept to make up the balances that you've used? We don't know what's going to happen next year. And as some of my colleagues have said, particularly Councillor Mills, we do need this funding now to assist the people who do need social care. And obviously, I just think it's totally irresponsible to be proposing to use the balances now just to defer this for the whole thing for a year. I think comments have made about other local authorities. North Yorkshire has much larger reserves than we have. So have County Durham. They're in a much more better position than we are. And I just think, as I say, it's totally irresponsible. And I would urge people to vote against the amendment. We have got a balanced MTFP, but we've obviously highlighted that at the end of that period, there will be difficulties. And I think by you asking to use reserves now, are just going to make that even worse at the end of this period. So I would certainly urge people to vote against the amendment.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott. So we now are going to move to voting for the amendment. The substantive amendment has a named vote, but there's no requirement for that unless colleagues would. Councillor Harker?
You've got to have a named vote.
Sorry, I was on mute. Are you concluding that we don't need a named vote on this?
No,
because if we don't, I was going to call for a named vote.
Seconded.
Could colleagues hold, please? Officers advise that there is support for a name vote, so we will undertake a name vote, and I will ask Mr. Swinhoe to conduct the name vote. Mr. Swinhoe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, members, you have an awareness of the amendment that you're being asked to vote on. Can you indicate whether you're voting for the amendment, against the amendment, or whether you're abstaining on the amendment? So I'll go through the list of names. Councillor Ali.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Abstain.
Councillor Baldwin. I'm not sure if Councillor Baldwin's on the call. Councillor Baldwin. Okay. Councillor Barch.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Boddy.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Dr. Chow.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cousins.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cruddis.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Crumby.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Cully.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Curry.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Donoghue.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Dalston.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Durham.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Harker.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hazeldine. 4. Thank you. Councillor Heslop.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Holroyd.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Howell.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cindy Hughes.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Hughes.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Jones.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Doris Jones.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Keir. Councillor Keir. I'll come back. Councillor Lang.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Lister.
4.
Thank you. I think Councillor Lucas is not with us. Councillor Marshall. Councillor Marshall. Councillor McCullum.
4.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mills.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Newell is not with us. Councillor Kevin Nicholson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Nicholson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Paley.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Preston.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Renton.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Andrew Scott.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Snedker.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tate.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Tosterman.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Against.
Thank you. Is Councillor Marshall with us tonight?
Mr. Mayor, he's just having issues with his mic. I've just spoken to him, but hopefully he can hear you. He just can't respond.
Is he able to indicate by being on screen and raising his hand? I can.
Maybe you could put it in the chat.
Okay, well, Councillor Keir as well. So.
Yep, for some reason my mic had turned off. I am against the amendment.
Okay, thank you. I don't know how we're going to record a vote from Councillor Marshall.
Mr. Swinhoe, Councillor Marshall has been putting thumbs down on the screen if you look at the image.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
I'm against.
Sorry, thank you very much.
I think this had been knocked.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. I think we've got everyone, so we'll come back with the figures in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. For are 18, against 25, and there are 3 abstentions. The amendment falls, and we return now to the substantive motion, which has been moved by Councillor Heather Scott, leader. It was second, and there was a reserve. A right to reserve to speak at a later point. If we can enter into debate on the substantive item now, please. Any discussion or comment or debate, please? Councillor Dalston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I go into my prepared statement, I'd just like to make the point around the police precept. For those that watch the police and crime panel, which was held last week, I believe, it was interesting to note the different commentary. But I ultimately, in the end, took the lead from a Labour councillor who was really concerned that there was multiple people asking for additional funds, and I couldn't, in good faith, allow for the precept that the police were asking when they're sat on the level of reserves that they are and what they were wanting to use for that. So I was quite pleased that Labour councillor stood up and put herself forward. I mean, she'll probably be deselected now, but you know, best of luck to her. But I think it is a shame because ultimately we lost the vote, and that was because, you know, Labour hold the majority on that committee. But I will go into my speech now, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to begin by thanking Elizabeth Davidson, the Council's Chief Finance Officer, and her team for the work that they have done in supporting Cabinet to develop this ambitious MTFP. The Conservative Group are confident that this budget reflects the priorities of residents within the borough and secures the funds to help deliver and sustain areas that focus on what's important to our communities. I'd like to begin by highlighting paragraph 15, section 14, which outlines our plans to launch the Stronger Communities Fund. £50,000 will be set aside to introduce this exciting initiative that we are creating to ensure councillors are equipped to support and enhance grassroots community projects and initiatives. Each member will be allocated £1,000, which can be put to various good causes that will sustain, enhance and develop all wards across our borough. We believe that this shows that this council is committed to ensuring our communities become stronger and more resilient, and that this fund will enable us to further support residents as we move forward. Whether it's a small Scouts club, an over-60s bingo group, or creating unique community events like Furthermore Alive, we believe this fund has the ability to unlock potential in all areas of our borough. Residents and communities are at the heart of everything we do, and we hope this fund is seen as a positive step forward in our ambitions to deliver success for Darlington. I'm also pleased that the community safety is focused on heavily within the MTFP, and that funding has been secured for an additional year of 2024-2025. This means, Mr. Mayor, that this administration has committed and invested an additional £834,000 over the life of the MTFP, meaning we'll be able to give our civic enforcement officers and community safety team the tools to do the job. This team has never been so equipped in tackling the issues residents have told us are important to them. I'm confident that this allocation of funding will ensure we can continue to tackle and deal with antisocial behaviour, environmental crime and fly tipping, all of which we will hope our communities will become more vibrant, safer and stronger. I'd now like to make commentary on paragraph 15, item 12, which allocates £500,000 to the ICT Architecture Fund. This fund will allow us to invest in the future and transform the way we operate and deliver services to our communities. The COVID-19 pandemic has allowed us to accelerate our transformation project so that we now have over 700 people working from home with the tools and kit to do their job. I must again thank the Chief Finance Officer, her team and Accentral Shared Services for the speed in which they delivered this transition. I'm particularly proud that this administration took the decision to roll out digital democracy, which other authorities have already been doing for a number of years. We ensured all 50 councillors were issued with laptops in May of last year, along with rolling out Modern Gov earlier this month. We are delighted that we are now at the final stages of moving to a paperless process. Again, Mr. Mayor, thanks must be given to our democratic team for supporting this rollout and ensuring that this council will reduce its carbon and become even more greener in the future. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I would like to reiterate how confident I am that this MTFP sets out the framework and funding to deliver one of this council's most ambitious and transformational council plans over recent years. It focuses on the areas that we know are most important to our residents and communities, and is underpinned by our ambition of creating strong economic success. We will continue to listen to residents along our journey of transformation and ensure that their views are at the heart of everything we do. I am fully in support of this report and confident that this sets out the road ahead to ensure we continue to deliver success for Darlington. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dalston. I'm just checking, Councillor Body, you did raise your hand and it's gone down again. Did you wish to contribute to the debate?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Body. OK, there's no further question or comment. We were not clear on who seconded. Could I clarify who seconded, and do they wish to speak on the debate?
It was Councillor Cruddas, and I think everything that's been said is fine.
Thank you, Councillor Cruddas. Councillor Heather Scott, do you wish to make any closing comments in response to you moving the debate?
No, I don't think so. I think that Councillor Dalston has covered, most of what I would certainly support. And if nobody else is indicating that they want to speak, I'm quite happy to move the recommendation and ask for support from the council.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Heather Scott. Leader. In accordance with the legislative requirements, I'll now ask Assistant Director Law and Governance, Mr. Swinhoe, to take a name vote on the recommendations moved by Councillor Mrs. Scott and seconded by Councillor Cruddas. Mr. Swinhoe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you're voting on the recommendations in the report. Councillor Ali. Councillor Ali.
I'm having technical. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah. Against. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Baldwin.
It's not there.
Yeah. Councillor Barch.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Body.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Dr. Chow.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cousins.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cruddas.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Crumby.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Cully.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Curry.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Donoghue.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Dalston.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Durham.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Harker.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hazeldine.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Heslop.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Holroyd.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Howell.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cindy Hughes.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Hughes.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Brian Jones.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Doris Jones.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Keir.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lang.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lister.
Against.
Councillor Lucas is not with us. Councillor Marshall.
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCollum.
Against.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Did you have your mic on when you said that?
Clearly not, Mr. Swinhoe. Against.
Thank you. Councillor Mills.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Newell is not with us. Councillor Kevin Nicholson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Nicholson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Paley.
Against.
Councillor Preston.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Renton.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Scott.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Snedker.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Tate.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Tosterman?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Wright?
For. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll just add up the totals and be back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. That is 27 for, 16 against, and 3 abstentions.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
What's point of order, Councillor Hazeldown?
I'd like to clarification from the Borough Solicitor on the motion that was the amendment to the motion that was moved by Councillor Harker, and clarify on his right to reply to that motion, which he wasn't allowed to, and also clarification on the ability to raise a motion before council with no notice that can be done straight away. It clearly states in the Constitution that the mover of the motion, if an amendment is moved, have the right to speak during and reply to the debate thereon. Could we have clarification from the Borough Solicitor on that? And if that has not happened during the debate, whether we are entitled to allow that motion to go on or able to challenge the decision.
I will bring Councillor Hazeldown. I will bring the Borough Solicitor in to explain. Okay.
Thank you.
Please go back
Mayor.
on mute.
Yes. So what was before members was a report with recommendations. That's equivalent to a motion. And then what was moved was an amendment. So that was the process that was followed. The purpose of a reply is given to the seconder, who can reserve their right to reply, which is why that sits with the style of dealing with an amendment. So the mover of an amendment speaks first, and then other people participate. They don't speak at the end. But the seconder can reserve the right to speak at the end and can pick up issues that arise from the debate. And that's the style that's been followed in this council for a number of years. And at the end of the debate on the amendment, the person who moved the original motion, or in this case presented the report, can reply, to what's happened during the amendment as it's been moved. So that's the process that we followed, and we've done it for a number of years previous to this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. I don't want to.
Point of order again, Mr. Mayor.
Which point of order is it,
Mr. No amendment
is
moved. It clearly states in the Constitution, if no amendment is moved, if an amendment is moved, you have a right to speak during and reply to the debate thereon. An amendment was moved, therefore Councillor Harker should have had the right to reply.
No,
that's written in the Constitution. If I'm reading it wrong, then fine.
Councillor Hazeldown, will you allow Councillor Mr. Swinhoe to reply? And I think we need to move on.
Yeah,
okay. And if there's any further issues, we'll have to take them outside of the meeting.
Yeah, the right of reply is with the person who moved the motion to start with, or presented the report in this case to start with. So the right of reply sits with, in this case, Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott. There's no right of reply to the person who's moving the amendment. But the reply right effectively goes to the seconder if they reserve their speech.
Thank you, Mr. Swinhoe. I would suggest I will seek to move progress. If you've got further issues, Councillor Hazeldown, I suggest you take them up with Mr. Swinhoe outside of the meeting. Okay, thank you. If we could move now to item number 6. Which is Darlington Capital Strategy, and the report has been circulated to all members. I now call on Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott, the leader of the council, to move the recommendations, speak to the report. Councillor Heather Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be brief. I move the recommendations in paragraph 7 of the submitted report and just make a very brief comment. This strategy provides an overview of capital expenditure and financial plans for the development, management and monitoring of the Council's investment plan. I would just like to highlight a couple of items, the plans for our housing stock, and I'm sure that Councillor Nicholson will expand on this when he moves the housing revenue account, roads and highways investment and the railway heritage quarter. I move the recommendations, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott. Is that seconded? Is that seconded?
Seconded.
By whom?
Councillor Marshall.
Okay, do you reserve the right to speak?
No.
All right. Okay, are there any questions to the Chief Officer's, Chief Officer Executive of a technical or factual nature of the report, please? There are no questions. I would now invite members to enter into discussion on the report. Please enter into debate if you so wish.
You're on mute, Mr. Mayor.
Right, I do apologise. There's been no discussion. It's up to you, Councillor Mrs. Scott, if you wish to make any comment, or should we move to a vote?
No, just move to a vote, Mr. Mayor.
Right, okay. I would now ask any members who do not support the recommendations moved by Councillor Mrs. Scott to indicate by raising their electronic hand. So those who do not agree. All right. Could I just ask those who agree to raise their electronic hand now? That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Item number 7 is Housing Revenue Account, MTFP 2021-22 to 2024-25. The report has been circulated to all members. I now call on Councillor Kevin Nicholson to move the recommendations and speak to the report. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make sure that I'll check my standing orders before I begin. I move the report relating to the Housing Revenue Account, MTFP, which has been previously circulated. And in doing so, Mr. Mayor, I would just like to make a few comments. Firstly, I would like to take the opportunity to thank officers for supporting me in preparing this report and for the vital work undertaken by members across the chamber in the scrutiny process. It is a vital tool and very helpful in creating this report. The housing team have worked tirelessly over the last 12 months and have been providing excellent service to our tenants, and I'm proud to represent the housing department in this chamber virtually. We have some of the most passionate and dedicated people serving all of our tenants, and my thanks go out to them this evening. I know during these exceptionally difficult times that our frontline teams have been undertaking a wide range of activities, supporting our tenants with often complex needs. We have often been their lifeline during these difficult times. I would also like to openly thank Pauline Mitchell, the Assistant Director of Housing, who retires shortly. Pauline has led the Housing Department in an exemplary manner, and she has been a huge support to me and her teams. There will, of course, be time to formally acknowledge Pauline's work in the next council meeting. In regards to plans for 2021-22, we are, of course, challenged by COVID-19, but I believe we have a realistic and stretching plan in place. These plans will help drive transformation in our housing department and will ensure that all of our tenants are getting the best possible service and experience while being our tenants. As with all of our plans, they are based on extensive insight and planning. For example, the Strategic Housing Marketing Assessment helps us understand how many affordable homes we need in the borough each year. Our Housing Investment Plan lays out our programme for investment of our housing stock each year, and our Tenants Board help us with grassroots feedback about those plans. Our investment plan has identified a capital works budget of £110 million over the next 5 years and a budget of £225 million capital works over the next 30 years, which includes our build programme. Our investment plan will ensure that works identified within the stock condition survey can be completed alongside any additional works that need to be done as appropriate and to an appropriate standard. I'm delighted, Mr Mayor, that we will be investing £950,000 to replace doors and windows in hundreds of our properties this year, and we will be investing £1.69 million in upgrading hundreds of kitchens and bathrooms too. We have also been successful in the LAD1 Warmer Homes grant, meaning that we'll be investing a further £1.5 million in energy efficiency measures, and we should hear any day whether we've been successful in the LAD2 funding. Mr Mayor, we are also beginning the process of reviewing all of our housing policies, including tenancy agreements. This will ensure that the area is fit for purpose and it reflects current climates that we live in. We are keen to reinforce our responsibilities as a landlord, and we are keen to highlight the rights and expectations of our tenants and the wider public. We are also revamping our Lifeline services, creating a corporate brand, ensuring that this vital service reflects the work that it actually does. I would also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the work of our extra care schemes, who have been supporting our tenants with digital exclusion by providing digital services and coaching our tenants throughout the year. I was delighted to see our housing team support young people in Skerne Park recently by donating 45 laptops to aid in remote learning. That said, the housing department is a diverse one and it reflects the people that it serves. Over the next few months, we'll be starting to highlight the work we do in a much more public way. I hope that members on all sides can celebrate this journey of transformation, which will help improve tenants' homes, modernise our approach as a council, and will shine a light on the amazing work that our frontline teams do to help deliver success for Darlington. Finally, Mr Mayor, I move the recommendations as detailed in paragraph 4 of the submitted report be approved.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Is that seconded?
Yes, I'll second it.
Thank you. So I would ask any members who have technical questions that these be directed to and answered by Mr Williams, Director of Economic Growth and Neighbourhood Services. Do we have any technical questions? No. Thank you, colleagues. Now invite members to enter into discussion on the report. Colleagues. Councillor Boddy, his hand has gone up and down.
I'd just like to express some concern that council house rents are going up this year, and disappointment about that, given the difficult circumstances so many people are in.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lister. Councillor Lister, you indicated you wish to speak.
I know. Be unmute.
You're on mute, Councillor Lister.
I know.
Your hand's raised. Do you not wish to speak? Bear with us, colleagues. While Councillor Lister checks a few things out, Councillor Crumby?
Yes, just to say, I know Councillor Lister's been having trouble with a microphone over the past week, so it could be that.
Okay, thank you. Don't know how we resolve this, colleagues.
I'm unmuted.
Excellent.
Every time people keep saying somebody has muted me, so if you're doing it, stop it.
Do you have a question or comment?
No, just a comment, really.
Thank you.
I know I'm always banging on about, the olden days, but I've never been on housing, but I do know that the housing committee it still does, and the department has a very proud record of standing up for the residents, and that when there was a lot of, fuss about getting rid of council houses, Darlington hung on to as many as it could, and some of the good work that Councillor Nicholson is now building on came from Councillor Dixon and Councillor Cliff Hutchinson. An unlikely duo, but they did get an awful lot of work done, particularly the Firth Moor being redone, etc., etc. So I'd just like to acknowledge that work. And I'm sorry about this, but this laptop's going to go through the window in a minute.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would suggest you don't do that, Councillor Lister. Any further question or comment? Just as Mayor, I would pay tribute to Extra Care and Lifeline, to the departments I've met as Mayor, and paid tribute to. So well done to them, but it's more than just those two departments, as we know. So a credit to the staff in housing. Councillor Allen. Councillor Allen?
Yeah, it keeps muting and unmuting itself. I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Boddy said. As well as rent increases and council tax increases, we're very, very concerned that it could mean an additional 7% increase in outgoings for the people who can least afford it. So that is our concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Any further question or comment before I bring Councillor Kevin Nicholson back into the debate to respond? Councillor Holroyd.
Thank you. Just a very brief comment about it's good to see replacement doors and windows, loft top-ups and heating replacements built in. I would urge, this is all in the housing investment plan, I would urge that where heating is being replaced and doors and windows are also being replaced, that the most energy efficient options be chosen so that you're not wasting tenants' money, I suppose, by choosing items that are not as efficient as they could be. If we cost in the price difference between a more energy efficient option and a less energy efficient option, it will save us money in the end. Thank you.
Kat. Any further question or comment? Okay, that concludes debate. Can I bring in Councillor Kevin Nicholson, please, to reply to the debate? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll try and answer the questions in the order that they came, but some of them were crossing over into different things. But I'll firstly make a comment on what Councillor Lister said about the evolution of housing, and I absolutely accept. Back when I was a twinkle in my dad's eye, Councillor Dixon was doing fantastic work in what was then, I think, the Housing Committee made all the decisions about what happened in town, and I think Pauline and him got on like a house on fire, I guess, making some fab choices, which have enabled us to make some of the decisions that we're making today, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. On council housing, I'm a big fan of council housing, and I would build a lot more council houses and buy a lot more council houses than probably I'd be allowed to. I think as a landlord, we are a fantastic landlord, and we have a waiting list of over 1,600 families wanting to get onto that council, into those council properties. So, the more we can do as a council to enhance that product, the better. So while I'm cabinet member for housing, housing is in safe hands, and we hope to expand it year on year and make that service even more fantastic than it is at the moment. In answer to Councillor Boddy's question, if I could answer those two questions, Councillor Boddy's and Councillor Allen's together about rent rises. I mean, it's no secret, and I'll share this with members, I wasn't particularly very happy that we were proposing a rent rise for our tenants, and I made my views known. However, I very quickly understood that should we not give a very small rent rise of £1.46 on average per week, that would mean that those things which we've celebrated with doors and windows and lots more enhancements than the ones I mentioned wouldn't be able to go ahead, or we'd be doing them at more of a reduced rate. And actually what our tenants are telling us, in fact, 60% of them tell us that they want to see this investment, and they have been supportive when they've been consulted of this rent rise. So actually, although I probably could recommend to council not to add the rents, I don't think tenants would be particularly happy that then they wouldn't see those investments like I've mentioned. In regards to the question of which Councillor Holroyd had mentioned, I'll have a lot more to to talk to you and Councillor Snedker about when we meet next week to talk about that very thing. What I would say about energy ratings and energy efficiency, we as a department, when we procure things, we are a customer at the end of the day, and what we've got to be mindful of is sometimes the supply and demand of those products which we're buying are not always there, and so we do have to make sure that we're getting the most in terms of the most customers, because ultimately that's what our tenants are, getting new doors and windows, and sometimes that might mean that energy efficiency rating isn't as great, but our tenants, again, 84% of them tell us that actually they do want to see a balance between energy efficiency and the amount of people who get, we'll call it an upgrade. So, you know, for me, it's really about balancing the need to look after the environment at the same time as allowing people to get some upgrades to their properties. But we can talk more about that, and the more money we get from government, and we're seeing that money coming down, which is fantastic, we'll be able to do some of those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. I'd now ask members who do not support the recommendations moved by Councillor Nicholson to indicate by raising their electronic hand.
Councillor Chow's got his hand up, Mr. Mayor, sorry.
All right. I'm going to be flexible here, Councillor Nicholson, even though I called you in to close down the debate. I'll bring in Councillor Chow, if it's a brief comment, Councillor Chow.
Sorry, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Oh.
He hasn't.
Drama over, Councillor Nicholson. Right.
For once,
don't read anything into that. I won't be flexible like that in the future, everyone. OK, if we could now move to an indication, colleagues, of those who do not support the motions moved. You raise your hand, please. Electronic hand. Councillor Allen does not. Right, sorry. That's 2. 3. Councillor Tate, did you indicate anything? You waving your hand? All right. Okay, so could I just hold on a second?
Oh, sorry.
Given there are indications of dissent, we will move to a roll call vote, colleagues. Mr. Swinhoe, everyone go to mute, and Mr. Swinhoe to take over.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, members, can you indicate whether you're for, against, or abstaining on the recommendations in the report? Councillor Ali.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Against.
I think Councillor Baldwin's not with us. Councillor Barch.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Boddy.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Dr. Chow.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cousins.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cruddus.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Crumby.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Cully.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Curry.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Donoghue.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Dalston.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Durham.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Harker.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hazeldine.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Heslop.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Holroyd.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Howell.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cindy Hughes.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Hughes.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Jones.
For.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Doris Jones.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Keir.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lang.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lister.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas is not with us. Councillor Marshall.
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCullum?
4.
Thank you. Mr Mayor?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mills?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Newell is not with us. Councillor Kevin Nicholson?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Nicholson?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Paley?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Preston?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Renton?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Scott?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Heather Scott?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Snedker?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tate?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tosterman?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Wright?
4.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Just give us a moment.
That's carried, members. Thank you, colleagues. Moving now to item number 8, which is Prudential Indicators and Treasury Management Strategy Report 2021-22. The report has been circulated to all members. I now call upon Councillor Johnson to move the recommendations and speak to the report. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is one of a statutory trio that is reported to Cabinet and Council over the year. This report is the first of those 3 and most important, as it is forward-looking, outlines capital plans, prudential indicators, the Treasury management strategy and investment strategies. The Treasury management function ensures the short-term cash flow is planned, managed effectively, and that future capital plans are financed in the most economic manner. The report highlights that the Council's expenditure plans and Treasury activity is in line with the Code of Practice, an integral part of the MTFP, and importantly, prudent, affordable and sustainable. I move the recommendations as detailed in paragraph 4 of the submitted report be approved. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
Yes, I second it.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Are there any questions to the Assistant Director Resources of a technical or factual nature of the report? There are no technical questions or factual questions. I'd now invite members to enter into discussion on the report. There are no indications of questioning. It's up to you, Councillor Johnson, if you wish to make a long speech. Councillor,
it keeps switching itself off.
Right.
No further comment, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. I'd ask members who do not support the recommendations moved by Councillor Johnson to indicate by raising their electronic hand. Is anyone against this? Okay, can I see those in favour, please? Raise your electronic hand. That is carried. Okay, thank you, colleagues. If you can lower your electronic hands now. Okay, item number 9 is setting the council tax for 2021-22. The report has been circulated to all members. I now call on Assistant Director Resources to introduce the report. Mrs Davison, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a technical report which sets out the 2021-22 council tax for both the council and other pre-secting bodies. The calculation is in accordance with the regulations and uses the council tax base, which was approved on the 28th of January by full council. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Assistant Director Resources. I now call upon Councillor Johnson to move the recommendations and speak to the report. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As noted already, this is a wholly technical report which sets the council tax levels for each band as prescribed by statute. I move this technical report as recommended in paragraph 5 for the reasons given in paragraph 6.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Is that seconded? Is that
yes, seconded? Yes.
Seconded. Oh.
Okay, that's been seconded. I'd now invite members to enter into discussion on the report. Councillor Heslop, please. Councillor Heslop. Councillor Heslop, do you wish to speak or not?
Yep, sorry, I'm here. I was just having trouble. I thought I'd switched on the one connection that hadn't. Right. I just want to speak about the Police and Crime Commissioner precept, if I may. And I'm going to quote from two different documents, if it's okay, Mr. Mayor. The first was the press release by the Police and Crime Commissioner, who basically, with the title, Overwhelming Majority Support for Increase in Police Element of Council Tax. Well, that was in the committee, but from the briefing we had, the survey they did was 40% for, 40% against, with 20% of people undecided. And that's, I don't know what the specimen number was for that. But also in that press briefing, he talks about additional police staff will be employed as a result of the rise. The result will include additional police staff to assist in helping the most vulnerable in the community, etc. The recruitment of additional police staff, the increase in the precept will enable the force to invest in technology infrastructure. My guiding principle, this is his words, is to ensure we have an effective and efficient police force. I'll agree with that. For the people of County Durham and Darlington, and maintain the highest standard of policing, with more officers on the street protecting the community. This increase will allow the force to bring forward the recruitment of additional and experienced police officers. And the rise in the precept will also enable more investment in technology. Now, the reason I've highlighted those particular bits in Steve Wright report is because of the weekend just gone. I spent a fair few hours looking this up and spent a couple of hours reading the Conservative Manifesto from 2019. Yeah, where they actually say headline figures, 20,000 more police and tougher sentencing for criminals. There is a question before anybody interrupts.
That would be useful, Councillor Heslop.
Yeah, we will bring back police and equipping the officers with the powers and tools they need. We'll embrace new technologies and crack down on online crimes. And in that, they talk about cybercrime. We will support all victims of domestic abuse. But basically, this was funded by the Tories, and when they stood in 2019 nationally, that they were going to fund a police force, etc., various things. So my question is, if this was supposed to be funded nationally, and there's nothing in the manifesto that says this is going to be funded out of local tax, why is the precept being increased to fund what basically should be funded nationally? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Heslop. Councillor Allen.
Mr. Mayor, I'm quite happy for Councillor Dalston to go because I don't want to actually comment on this item. I have a query regarding the way we've been voting, if I may. So I'll let Councillor Dalston go first.
Councillor Dalston.
I mean, I'm certainly not the spokesperson for the police, but what I would say is that the reason that they are highlighting all of these issues is because they've sat on a substantial amount of reserves for quite a significant period of time. All of what has been outlined could have and should have, and I'll quote, I won't quote them as individuals, but by the police's own admission, they should have better IT equipment, they should have better radios, because the money has been there for a number of years. But let's be clear, this precept and why it's been asked is for us to backfill the funds that they intend to use on a £23 million custody suite from an unelected official, and that's the reason we're now asking people to pay the bill. So it's not because it's not a government issue, it's because they've kept the money and they're investing it in something that, well, both myself and Councillor Wallace don't think they have a mandate to be doing. So for me, I just can't understand why they haven't been getting the basics right and investing in the areas that we know are important, like IT and additional police officers on our street. So that's the only commentary I would make.
Okay, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just build on the point that some were made there by Councillor Heslop? I mean, he's quite correct about the increase in the precept. I had to look at the figures myself. The police precept in 2016-17 was £169.24, and next year it will be £230.24, and that's an increase of nearly 40% as far as I can work out. And that isn't negligence on the part of the Durham Police Authority. I think we know, Mr. Mayor, in all aspects, including financial management, we have the best police force in the country. It's a fact that, however, Durham is historically underfunded. There needs to be a fairer way of funding Durham Police when compared with other police authorities. It needs to be adequately funded by the government. But secondly, pressures that really should be met by the government, council taxpayers are expecting to meet. So Councillor Dalston and I, and Councillor Brown-Jones as well, both heard that in fact the cost of the additional police that the Conservative government are trumpeting, a lot of that is being met through the precept. And without the increase in the precept, through the base budget, and without the increase in the precept, the increased costs like police wages and other matters, they simply couldn't afford. It's not mismanagement by Durham Police, Mr. Mayor. It's simply the way the government chooses to treat Durham and Darlington. Thank you.
You're on mute, Mr. Mayor.
You're on mute, Mr.
Yeah,
Mayor.
I'm just, yes, thank you for that reminder. I was checking with colleagues as to whether Councillor Boddy had spoken already. I'll bring you in shortly, Councillor Allen, because you seem to have a technical question, but I wish to have this debate dealt with first. Councillor Boddy? You're on mute.
Can I just say, Mr. Mayor, the way to increase the number of frontline police officers is quite clearly, it's quite clearly identified for anyone by the policy that's been implemented in Scotland. If you simply were to merge the 3 constabularies north of the River Tees and half of Cleveland Constabulary, you'd have more resources available for frontline police because you'd have fewer senior officers.
Thank you, Councillor Boddy, for that helpful suggestion. But I think I want us to get back onto what is a technical report. But thank you for that suggestion. Any further question or comment? Councillor Allen, did you wish to make a comment relevant to this item?
No.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Okay, so that's been moved and seconded. We've had a debate. Councillor Johnson to reply to the questions, comment and debate.
Thank you, Chair. I don't wish to bring national politics into this council chamber. We do not benefit from that. And I thank Councillor Dalston for his information on the police precept setting. But I am not involved with the police in how they set their precept, on what basis. I feel that there is some concern from members who have been involved, and therefore I will pursue this with Mrs. Davison, and we'll see if we can get a more solid answer which we can present to the members. But I don't believe I can do anything at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Allen, do you wish to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. But it's on the voting issue. I noticed. So
you're asking for some clarification?
Yeah, purely because several times and under your mayorship, what happens is, and especially since we're now on laptops, you call for who's against, and then you call for who's for.
On a point of order, Mr. Mayor, this is nothing to do with this report. It's a part one question at the end.
Okay, we will.
In that case, I will ask this question at the end at the appropriate time. I apologise to members.
Councillor Allen, I would suggest that you discuss this issue outside of the meeting with me, and then on the basis of that, I'll communicate with all members. Okay, feel free to ring me at any time, even after this meeting this evening. Thank you. Okay. So, could I, right, in accordance with the legislative requirements, I will now ask the Assistant Director Law and Governance to take a name vote on the recommendations moved by Councillor Johnson. Mr. Swinhoe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just by way of explanation on the name vote issue, the law was changed about 6 years ago to require issues related to the setting of council tax. So that's the MTFB report and this agenda item to be done by named vote, so the public would know how members are voting on matters to do with setting the council tax. So if you could indicate for, against or abstain. Councillor Ali?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Allen?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Baldwin, I don't think is with us. Councillor Barch?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Bell?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Boddy?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Dr. Chow?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Clark?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cousins?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cruddas?
Shouting.
Councillor Cruddas?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Crumby?
Against.
Councillor Mrs. Cully?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Curry?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Donoghue?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Dalston?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Durham?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Harker?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hazeldine?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Heslop?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Holroyd?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Howell?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cindy Hughes?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Hughes?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Jones?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Doris Jones?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Keir?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lang?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Layton?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Lee?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lister?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas is not with us. Councillor Marshall?
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCollum?
Against.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Mills?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Newell is not with us. Councillor Kevin Nicholson?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Nicholson?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Paley?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Preston.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Renton.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Scott.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Snedker.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tate.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tosterman.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
4.
Thank you. So just a few members.
Just wait a moment, colleagues, while officers tot up the results. Councillor Allen, whilst you're totting the result, please feel free when this meeting ends to stay on the Teams call to have a quick discussion about your questions or concerns. Is that okay?
That's fine, thank you.
No problem. Colleagues, for 27, against 16, abstentions 3, that is carried. Item number 10. Item number 10 is Police and Crime Commissioner, Tees Valley Combined Authority and by-elections, May 2021. The report has been circulated to all members. I would now call upon the Assistant Director, Law and Governance to introduce the report, but before I do that, colleagues, there may be some specific details, operational details. I'd remind colleagues that I do not wish to prejudice any debate, but there is a modicum of delegation in terms of resolving any concerns and issues going forward. So bear that in mind, and I would be loath to make hasty decisions this evening. Mr. Swinhoe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So members, the report before you sets out some proposed changes to the locations of polling stations ahead of the May elections. The reasons for those changes are set out in the report, and there's also a delegation to allow changes to be made at pace if we need to make additional changes ahead of May, and there is no meeting to deal with those issues. So I'll leave Councillor Johnson to present the rest of the report.
Are there any technical?
Mr. Swinhoe, can you mute? Okay, are there any technical questions? Councillor Boddy?
Yes, we just wanted to ask, there's a change in polling station in our ward, and we were wondering if the Bishop of Hexham had been approached about the use of Thomas Aquinas Church.
Any further technical questions?
We did a survey of available locations based on the information we had available to us, and we consulted with relevant board members and group leaders. I mean, obviously there's a range of different options available. I can't give precise reasons why that was ruled out, but it wasn't put forward when we consulted with group leaders.
Well, I think an approach to the bishop might be beneficial.
Noted. Any further technical questions? Okay. Can I bring in Councillor Howell, please? I presume you've got a technical question, Councillor Howell?
I don't believe I've registered in any way, Mr. Swinhoe.
Your hand was raised. All right, we'll move on. Okay, Councillor Johnson. Could I call on Councillor Johnson to move the recommendations, speak to the report? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Mayor, sorry. We're looking for the new locations. We realised that some of them are a distance from the previous polling places that we know, and we do apologise for this. However, there's still postal voting and proxy voting will continue. The current list of 7 new locations in this report and any further changes will be advised to members and local councillors.
Okay.
The location of the polling places will be advised to voters in the normal pre-voting paperwork, which is posted out to residents. I move the recommendations as detailed in paragraph 5 of the submitted report be approved. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Is that seconded?
Yes, that's seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Heather Scott. Any question or comment from colleagues? No. It would seem there's nothing to reply to, Councillor Johnson. Those who were against, could you indicate? There are none against. Could I have an indication of who's in favour? That is carried. Thank you, members, for a very civilised meeting this evening. That concludes the business of the council meeting. Good evening. Councillor Allen, please stay on the call whilst others may wish to depart.